Hi, welcome to the Conversation Shop with Sedrick Page. I'm here with my very special guest, Miss Susan Tucker. How are you doing, Susan?
Awesome.
Well, welcome. I'm very happy to have you back here. It's been over a year since we had you on the show as a guest, and you're one of our original guests on the show. And again, I want to thank you very sincerely for coming back.
Oh my gosh. You have done amazing things for me by challenging me on that original conversation. So I am so grateful to you for having this conversation. And prior to you, I never talked about my trauma almost with anyone. So for me to go from all walls up to then you challenging me, a deer in a headlight look, right, to where now I'm able to share my story,
Yes.
it has drastically changed my life.
Well,
So I'm so thankful for you.
Well, let's dive right in. Tell me about that. So, catch me up. Tell me about, the impact of doing that first show, some of the awakenings that, that happened after that show and your walk. Catch us up a little bit.
Okay. So you and I had talked about, and I gave myself permission to be authentic and vulnerable. We had talked about that. But I did not know the questions you were going to ask. And so when
Right.
you started to talk about trauma, I went into it in a obviously very honest way, but I did not realize what was going to happen after that conversation.
Right.
And I think it was like the second month
yes, it was.
when I messaged you and I said, oh my gosh, I'm really thankful for what you have helped me through. However, I feel like I got stuck for about 90 days. So
Okay.
those first 3 months right after the conversation shop, I wallowed. I got stuck, and it was almost like my past was holding me back. It was the stories, it was, everything.
Now, catch my audience up a little bit. What about the past that was bothering you?
Yeah?
Susan, if you don't mind me sharing with my audience,
Yes.
is an adopted
Adopted at age 7,
at age 7 to a wonderful family here
incredible family, yes.
in Madison,
Yes.
and sharing her story with us and the audience about her journey as an Asian American woman in that space. How do you self-identify? What's your definition of beauty when you don't see people that look like you?
Right.
And you see every definition of beauty that doesn't point back to you. Culturally,
Yeah.
how do you navigate and how do you act when you're in a school, a situation, an environment, a setting where you're actually the only person of color
Yeah.
in the room? So culturally, how do you fit in? Do you fit in by embracing what makes you different? Do you fit in by assimilating and forgetting to a certain extent your ethnicity?
Right.
So those are some of the things that we talked about on the last show, and those are some of the things that we're going to be discussing and getting a follow-up on this show. So I just wanted to bring everyone kind of full circle back
Yes.
on some of the things that Ms. Tucker and I had been speaking about. And again, I just thought it's just very amazing how inspiring you are to other women, no matter what race, color, or creed, but specifically young Asian women who have similar experiences that you have and that you have had. So again, thank you for being here. So I just wanted to catch
absolutely.
everyone back up. So after you left the show,
Yes.
you had about 90 days.
Oh yeah.
of
First 3
the-
months.
The first 3 months of just kind of being stuck in this space of kind of just thinking about everything,
Yeah.
thinking about the trauma.
Absolutely.
So take us, so
Go back.
we're here. So share with us a little bit of some of the traumatic things you were navigating as you were redefining who you were.
Okay, so the majority of my adult life, I had said in the first conversation shop that from the moment that I landed into the Tucker family at age 7, I drove forward. That's it. I never looked backwards. So I knew a lot of trauma had happened to me, but I knew I was given another chance. So God placed this family into my life, and from the moment that I landed into their family, I moved forward. And I had 4 older brothers who I'm so grateful for, because it was, you know, the constant, Susie, you can't do that. because you're the youngest and you're a girl. And that drive was exactly what took me in my adult life to move forward, take a lot of action. But I will tell you, I repressed everything from 0 to 7. I've literally, as a child, would tell people my life started when I was 7 because I couldn't remember 0 to 7, didn't want to because I knew it was trauma, and multiple traumas, not just one. So biological, I'm going through some attachment, anxious, trauma, attachment with my biological mother. I think that that is a very huge piece of what I had to endure with my biological mother. My parents died, by the way, when I was younger. And then I found this out from my biological family since. So in the last year, I have found out actual facts about where I landed. And so between about 3 and 6, I lived with my mother's side mother. So it was a grandmother. And that's where all the trauma happened. So the sexual abuse past the attachment with my mother. She died, then I was given to my grandmother, and then there was sexual trauma there between 3 and 6. Then I was with the foster family, and then I was adopted. So there's a lot of transitions, a lot of evil that had happened in my life, but I knew to a certain degree in my subconscious, but I drove so hard because I repressed it. I didn't want to know that that happened. One, I thought if I shoved it in a box, threw it away, threw the lock away, and I run as fast as I physically could forward in my life, that I could somehow erase that trauma. And of course, we as adults know anything we resist persists. That's part of, part of the process of becoming successful is that you have to learn about your subconscious mind and what
your triggers are.
Not only triggers, but what's in your subconscious beliefs that actually hold you back from success. And that's a lot of your past.
Yes, it does. It's
So you
tied to a lot of your past.
You have to face your trauma. You have to face your self-limiting beliefs, your lack of worthiness. So all the stuff that showed up for me, even though as a child I was showing up probably very shameful or and the shame isn't even mine, right? I mean, it's just because I was sexually traumatized. It's not even mine, meaning it wasn't my own fault.
Right, exactly.
But yet it shows up, and I have...
Because you blame yourself for someone wanting to even do those kinds of things to you at times, so from what I've heard when you've been in those situations.
And I'm not sure if I directly blame myself, but it's in my subconscious that something horrific happened to me, and so therefore, because I couldn't control that, I then tried to control everything else in
Let
my
me
life.
ask you a question.
Yeah.
So, you're adopted, and you adopted with this white family here out of Madison.
Incredible
And
family.
you have your life begins.
Yes.
So my question for you is, how did you look at other people that looked like you ethnically? Did you see them as a
I didn't see very many.
as a scary place?
I didn't see very many people at all.
You
You have to remember, I went to an all-white, Christian school,
Right.
and I was bullied. So there's the re-trauma.
Re-trauma.
So there's the bingo. So, and I think on the last show I had said there was one black girl, and she had left because of the trauma she was facing. But then again, I don't look at it just as a race thing, but there were, people who were overweight who got traumatized, and there were people who were really skinny or had maybe freckles. So, I took it as that it was because of my race, because that was such a big distinction, but there were a lot of other kids that were traumatized. So when I was traumatized, you know what I would do? This is the spirit that I was. And my mom always would say, "Oh, Suze, it feels like you're going out and fighting all these broken people." Well, I was. That's the only way that I could learn to cope and survive as a little kid, is whenever I was traumatized, I'd go and out on the playground, I would go and make other individuals who were bullied feel better and console them, because I had empathy and compassion, unlike most people have.
Well, you got that from some of the bullying and whatnot that you were going through and trying to navigate in your head, and I'm glad that you could segment it from who you were ethnically.
Yes.
But again, I think that goes back to part of your trauma.
Oh,
because
of course.
Because a lot of, I won't say a lot because I don't believe in jumping into minds or assuming what other people think.
Yes.
But there's I can make a very educated guess
Yes.
that a large percentage of the trauma that you were going through
Yes.
was because of who you were ethnically.
Yes. Well,
You know,
especially in the school.
And then when you're young and you're not even, that's not where your mind goes.
Right.
To that, you go to all the other traumatic things that you're
Yes.
navigating.
Yes.
As a young woman.
Yes.
Who am I? Am I pretty enough? Am I one of the
Right.
the cool girls?
Right.
All these little social things that we navigate that everybody has to go through and
Of course.
everybody has to deal with. And then when you add the ethnicity
Yeah.
on top of it, it's just another wave, another layer.
Yes.
The same with the African American young lady there. I'm sure when she was there, positive, she was trying to navigate it not from a space of being an African American woman in the
Yeah.
space, thinking that it had everything to do with her personally.
Right.
And then, maybe getting to a point to where, it was very clear to her that it had a lot to do with her ethnicity
Right.
or her racial
Yes. Well, she and I
identification,
were friends.
identity,
Yes.
in this space. And, when you have a historical marker that reference point that you can go back to, I can see why her parents may have felt removing her from that situation, because again, when you're young, and I'm realizing that with my own children, negative situations have a huge potential of scarring
Sure.
a child long term.
Absolutely.
In terms of their self-esteem.
Yes.
And in terms of creating traumatic spaces.
And
So-
I can attest to that. I can definitely attest to that. I had so much trauma as a young one. My parents had no idea that in a Christian school that I was going to get traumatized that much. And then I started to, after a little while, I started to just shut down to a point where I just was not sharing it with anybody.
Right. And
I wouldn't tell teachers. Well, they didn't know. I wouldn't even, tell my mom and dad, my brothers, none of it. I just said, you know what, Susan, this is something maybe, as insightful. I think as even a kid, I realized it's part of the burdens I must live through. But I
It's
also
across the
knew,
bear.
yeah, but yet I knew, even as a little kid, I knew there were going to be things that I have already overcome. I was going to continue to overcome, and it would someday make me a better person. And so
Well-
I believe that still to this day. And there's more, obviously. We're going to talk about that. But there's so much more from that space.
Well, I can tell you that you are very, very strong
Oof.
woman, and that strength was jumping out.
Sometimes
or
too strong.
that inner ability. Well, it's your survival
Yes.
techniques. You want to survive, right?
Absolutely.
You want to survive and push yourself forward through
Yep.
any adversity.
That's right.
And we're going to pick up on that and explore that a little bit on the next segment.
Awesome.
Okay?
Yes.
We'll be right back on the Conversation Shop. Hi, welcome back to the Conversation Shop with Sedrick Page. I'm here with my very special guest and friend, Miss Susan Tucker. Welcome back, Susan. Well,
So excited to be here, Cedric, with you.
yes, well, on the first segment, we did our reintroduction of Susan and talking about some of the trauma that she's experienced being an Asian American woman that's adopted here in America, and navigating the trauma that she had experienced in her life prior to being adopted, carrying that over with her here in America with her adopted family, and then navigating different variations of trauma as we move forward in life. And trying to share this with my audience as in an effort to give you tools to navigate similar situations and come out of it in a very strong, peaceful way, in the same way that Miss Susan Tucker has. So using this as a teaching tool. So again, Susan,
Yes.
let's dive right back into this. Share with my audience a little bit of some of the trauma that you've had to overcome, and some of the tools that you put in place to overcome them.
Awesome. So during childhood, I would say, and I don't want to call it necessarily racism, but it's called hateism, right? Because of perhaps looking different than my adoptive family. And I think that had a lot to do with the trauma as a child. Then, going into adolescence, that's when I'm figuring out who I am as a woman, what beauty is, all of those things. I think throughout that part of my life, because of the shame that showed up and a lot of the trauma characteristics that are going to show up with anybody that's been traumatized. So there's I want to take a moment just to explain what trauma and how that shows up in a person and what the qualities might look like.
Yeah, be my guest.
So let's talk about this. So, and I did not know this prior to this last year. Since this conversation, the first one, I had to look into what is trauma and how is a person who has been traumatized, how does that show up? So it shows up in not being able to trust people, putting up your walls, not having very stable relationships. Because again, if trust is gone, how can you be connected to somebody else? So putting up those walls, isolation, that's a huge part. PTSD, and then there's obviously complex PTSD, and I've had to go even from really learning what PTSD for the first time in my life and accepting the fact that I have complex PTSD. So this is a stream of consciousness, but even prior to this interview, I had said to you, it's my third night without really sleeping. Well, I've dealt with insomnia my entire life and never knew why. And of course, with the therapy I have gotten through my trauma expert, amazing woman, that I realized my insomnia had everything to do with the trauma. So as I heal more of my trauma, and then I'll maybe be able to sleep, who knows? But this is how I've been my entire life. And the
real
brain.
Quick question. What's your definition of trauma?
Well, there's obviously a real definition of trauma. So complex PTSD, well, and what I've learned is that anybody who's been sexually abused and violated at a very young age has perpetual complex PTSD, which is the post-traumatic stress disorder that allows for, so what happens with the brain is that there's a wiring that's different with a traumatized brain versus a person who hasn't been traumatized. The wiring in our brain is not, and I would never use the term normal, but the synapses and the wiring is disconnected.
Gotcha.
So it's easier for those individuals who've been traumatized to get re-traumatized and get triggered. As you use that word, triggered, there's a reason for a trigger. And that is anything that looks like your past, all of a sudden will re-trigger you to feel like this particular situation, oh my gosh, reminds me of something that happened 20 years ago.
And
so
you respond the way you responded 20 years ago.
Bingo.
You're right
because
back
emotionally, correct. Because emotionally, if people have not done their work, it all of a sudden, in an instant, in an emotion, you're going to be pulled back into that original trauma. So the learning that I've done in the last really 9 months, okay, because I finally said to myself, and I'm so thankful I have a wonderful human being in my life that challenged me to face my biggest fears, because we all know we can't be who we're meant to be on the other side if you can't face them.
So what were some of those fears you had to face? If you don't mind sharing a couple of those.
Oh my gosh, well, just in a relationship, personal relationship, I'll
just
share.
across the board.
Oh gosh, trust, which we spoke about in the first segment.
Yes.
Or in the first conversation. Trust has been a parallel in my life. So here's where I have been betrayed. I guess that's the word, right? Trust, so, and forgiveness has been an integral part of this healing process. So the healing, and I can't say that I have forgiven my original violation, or even my biological mother, who again, it wasn't my fault that she maybe had some issues, and could not provide for me or care for me. But I've had to go through a whole series of forgiveness from that original trauma all the way even to the individuals in business. So you were, in the first conversation, you were saying, "Oh, Susan, you're such an amazing, successful," and I couldn't own that last year. I could not own that. I could not own my accomplishments. I couldn't own some of the successes I've had because so much shame was brought up through various things, such as 16 people who owe me money. Me putting myself into extremely traumatic, extremely horrible situations in business, very high risk, or I would align with individuals that I should not have aligned with. I carried partners okay, did 90% of the work and wrote out checks to a partner. How is that? Wouldn't you love to be my partner, right? And part of that was because of, I think, being such an action-oriented person. As an adult, I was all about action. Don't talk to me. Don't talk to me. Just take action.
Well, coming from
Yeah.
your previous trauma and then with your birth parents,
Yeah.
you know, what I've found in similar situations is that it's this, I call it the unquenching thirst of wanting to be worthy.
Yes.
So you're always seeking value, revaluation, and you're always trying to prove
Yes.
worthiness.
Yes.
It's a part of the trauma.
Yes.
You know, so as you were sharing those things with me,
Yes.
would you agree that some of that was filtered through that lens of
Yes.
worthiness, proving yourself worthy?
Yes.
You know, or even the notion of proving yourself.
Yeah.
And proving yourself has many layers to it.
Oh, for
But
sure.
writing a check going, here, you should be my partner, that's a form of validation and
Absolutely.
proving yourself.
Yes.
And saying I'm worthy.
Yes.
So
that's
talk
okay.
to me about that a little bit.
Okay, there's a couple different stories I want to tell you about need to prove, okay? So originally with the 4 older brothers that need to prove that I am just as smart, just as capable as you are. And from there, I went into, right out of college, lived in Minneapolis, worked 70, 80-hour weeks, managing a restaurant, okay? 50 employees. It was a Japanese restaurant called Ichiban Steakhouse, downtown Minneapolis. Okay, get
I
this.
know Ichiban.
Okay, so get this. And I know that's so funny that you and I were both living in, Minneapolis as well. But so get this. I am a manager, female. Here's what I look like. I'm an Asian female. Okay? Guess who are my subordinates and or the people that I'm managing? A lot of chefs, teppanyaki stations. So like 20 chefs. Just imagine that, right? You think that they immediately took orders from an Asian woman?
You know, culturally, in that culture, no.
Oh no, because women are subservient to a lot of them. Not every single one of them. Okay, so there's these generalizations, stereotypes that were also playing into my life at that time. And I remember going, well, there must be a reason why you're in this. So you know what? As a leader or as a manager, you're just going to prove to them. Like you have proved everything else in your life, you're going to prove to them. And I did.
Let's go back. Let's
Yeah.
explore that a little bit.
Sure.
So now you're at Ichiban and you're with other Asian Americans
Yeah.
that are working,
Men and
right?
women, yes.
Men and women. And it's I'm assuming it's one of the first times you've been in that situation.
In a management position,
Management
yes.
position.
Yes.
So you're navigating different attitudes, a lot of different things.
And I was young.
And you're young.
I was very young.
So again, going back to your trauma, because in your original trauma,
Yes.
the people that had done those things to you that
Yes.
initiated the non-trust, were people that looked like you.
Asian, yeah. You know
So-
what? I never put that together,
So,
Sedrick.
and as you're navigating these attitudes,
Yes.
do you feel like you may have been navigating them from a space of non-trust because of that trauma? Because all of those things could have been triggers
Yeah.
from your past that you were completely
Yeah.
unaware of when you catch yourself breathing hard, you
Right.
catch yourself getting anxiety and you don't know where it comes from, and you catch yourself
Yes.
getting hot,
Right.
and you're going, okay, why am I getting like this?
Yeah, right.
So talk to me about that, and share with me whether would you agree, if that's something you haven't thought of before. Tell me how that makes you
Honestly,
feel.
I've not thought about that. However, I would say it was more from a space of need to prove in a male environment. Okay, again, a need to prove, which is kind of a message in my life, because then from this stage, I went into the business world. And so the writing out the checks to partners, okay, or individuals that didn't necessarily put in as much effort as I did, time, effort, energy, right? It's interesting because I have had to look at that and go, it was absolutely based on my lack of feeling worthy as a female. But you have to remember this. Let's go back now. Subconscious mind. Susan was given up as a little girl. Little girl, she was given up. Her 2 older biological brothers were not given up.
Okay.
They were kept. They
They
kept
were boys.
those 2 boys. Yes, they did. So somehow, subconsciously, my mind went to, well, everything that's female about you must not be as good.
Good.
Bingo.
Mhm,
So
worthiness.
that subconsciously got driven into me very young, to a point where I embraced everything male about me, meaning you know how there's the masculine energy, there's the female energy. You
That's
and I
how
were
you
talking about
protected
that.
yourself.
Yes, it was. It was all out of survival. Because I thought, well, if a whole culture gave up a little girl, so what is it about the qualities of a little girl? Must not be good. So subconsciously, and again, subconsciously because I was a little kid, I said, okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to embrace all what men do and do everything they do.
So let's stop right there. Let's go back
Yeah.
to Ichiban.
So yeah.
Let's take that whole little masculine embrace.
Yep.
And that embrace, what we've talked about, is part of
Sure.
you navigating your trauma.
Yep.
So as you're there managing these men culturally,
Yes.
who see you as a woman and don't want to take
Yep.
direction from you,
For 6 months.
do you see that as playing right into your trauma as well? And hold that thought. Hold that thought. We're gonna delve into that on the next segment.
Awesome. Okay.
We'll be right back on the Conversation Shop. Hi, welcome back to the Conversation Shop with Sedrick Page. I'm here with my guest, Miss Susan Tucker. Susan, we're just going to jump right back into the conversation we were having before. Prior to the break, I had asked the question of going back and reflecting on the trauma from when you were a child,
Yes.
prior to being adopted, you know, and some of the abuse that
Yes.
you experienced during that time.
Yes.
And my question was, having, you know, once you were adopted and just looking forward and never looking back, you know, as you find yourself in Minnesota and you're managing this Ichiban's restaurant, and
Yes.
now you're managing, but you're surrounded by people that look like you racially and ethnicity wise.
Sure.
You know, do you feel that some of the trauma the trauma attached to your masculine traits, your ability to forge forward, your ability to embrace everything masculine, because some of the trauma from when you were younger was attached to you being a woman?
Right.
Culturally, maybe them not putting a lot of value into you being a woman.
Right.
The more value being placed into your two brothers that were kept, you know, that baggage that we carry
Yep.
from that. Would you agree, or would you, or even if you've never thought about it, is that something that you think affected your interaction with these people or these men
With these men?
that you were navigating at this space?
You know what? I don't think so.
Okay.
And here's why I say that, because I think I was just too busy working 70, 80-hour weeks,
Okay.
managing them, but then the disrespect or the lack of hearing me and
That's
what
I'm
needed to
talking
get
about.
done. Okay, got it. So for 6 months, I had to prove. I mean, literally. So, you know, there's 3 different levels. And if, let's say, we had a really busy shift and the upstairs needed somebody to, you know, grab cases of beer, guess what? I do it. And there I am in my suit, my heels, and there I am going from the basement and running with a serious, you know, case of beer and running it all the way up. Now I would have quite a few guys just say, well, let me take care of that. And I'd be like, no, you get back to work right now. Get back to work and let me take care of this. To a point where I did everything that anybody else would do in this same role, and it's a need to prove.
No, yeah, definitely a need to prove. I would agree.
Absolutely.
Because
Absolutely.
you're worthy. We're back to the worthiness.
Yeah, absolutely. And
I can do it just as good as a man,
well,
which makes me worthy.
right. Well, and you know what? I wasn't going to act any different. Here's something that my father told me when I was 12 years old that I think is really, really important. I forgot to say it in the first conversation. And this is, you know, my adoptive father, who at age 12, and I didn't know why he was saying it, but he said, you know what, Susan? You're going to work twice as hard, if not more.
I know why he told you that.
Than your white 4 older brothers, twice as hard. And the reason you're going to work twice as hard is because 1, you live in a man's world, and 2, you live in a white man's world. So that was his belief,
Well,
and therefore that's what he taught me at a very early age. I didn't get it all throughout my adolescence until probably about the time that I was at Ichiban, where I said, okay, look out world. I am going to work hard. And you know what? It was from that place that I worked 70, 80-hour weeks, probably got to be more than that. in my entrepreneurial world. So I started right out of college. I paid off my student loans in 3 years. I didn't know that was unusual, but you know, nobody paid for my college education. My mom and dad said, we expect you guys to go to college, but you know what? We had 5 of you, so guess what? We're not going to be able to pay for your college. So go to college. And I worked 3 part-time jobs, put myself through college, UW. But then I still, you know, had $38,000 worth of student loans. So I moved up to Minneapolis and managed restaurants and paid it off in less than 3 years.
Well,
and then got into the entrepreneurial world.
What I'm going to share with you, and
Yeah.
we're going to, I'll let you, you know, we're going to talk about that a little later.
Yes.
But as I'm listening to you, you know, we talked about trauma, the trauma of validation with worthiness,
Yes.
non-trust,
Huge.
and then the embracing of the masculine.
Yeah.
I will tell you that listening to you, I still see you doing that.
I still
like
do
you,
it.
Like you,
oh, big
like
time.
as you're sharing the story,
Big time.
you're and I think it's a great story. You're navigating the world
Yes.
still through that trauma,
Yes, I know.
still through that trauma, and through that need to validate your worthiness, and through the complete embracing
Yes.
of masculine traits and tendencies
Yes.
that further validate your worthiness.
Yes.
You know,
I
so
agree.
as I'm
I
listening
agree.
to you, that's what's popping up in my head.
Absolutely.
And you know, I think it's amazing because I know what your story is.
Yeah.
On how everybody doesn't have this skill. Let me first say this.
Okay.
How you've used your trauma and understood your trauma to a point to push you forward to be successful,
I see.
despite of the trauma. You've used it as fuel.
Yes, I did.
You've used it as a roadmap to be successful, but that success, to me, is still a validation. It's still attached to your trauma.
Absolutely.
Because it's your validation that you're worthy and you're good enough.
Right.
If that makes any sense.
It does.
So think
It
about
does.
that. Think
Okay.
about that a little bit. But
I will.
you know, as we finish talking this segment, talk to me about some of the other
Yes.
traumas or other pains that you've had to overcome and how you've overcome them since our last conversation. I don't want to
Okay.
get stuck.
No.
in
That's
this space.
okay. But just to finish that off, it is interesting that throughout my life, I have perpetuated trauma since that original violation at age 3. Actually, I think it's even before that because, like I said, there's attachment trauma with my mom at
Right.
birth.
Worthiness.
So birth. So from birth, and what trauma does is cause shame and lack of worthiness because of what happened to us. So that has been a parallel in my life. From even the restaurant where, like I said, I needed to prove. But then, in the entrepreneurial world, I can talk a little bit about that and the traumas there. But as I had mentioned before, over $1.6 million, Sedrick, of burns and situations where I put myself into really tough situations where I got, the wool pulled over my eyes, or somebody had to tell me just a sad story, and all of a sudden I wanted to reach out because I have an addiction to helping people. That's something I've had to also face.
Okay.
This is my addiction to, not only am I a workaholic, but I'm also addicted to helping people. And I've hurt, so I literally have hurt myself by being addicted to helping people to my demise.
I hear that. Let me
And
ask
I don't
you
want to
this.
do that anymore.
I would agree. Let me say this to you, though, as I hear
Yes.
you say that, and again, I'm understanding where it comes from.
Sure.
Is it because you see yourself in some of those stories when you hear that people need help? Because
Some.
you were that young girl, that child that needed help and didn't receive it.
Some of it, but I think it's more than that.
Okay.
Helping others, so I didn't have to help myself.
Okay, talk to me about that
Yeah.
a little bit.
Okay, so if trauma has allowed me to get to a certain point in my life where I can help a ton of other people because I know that they're traumatized as well, right? But if my subconscious mind drives me to move forward, I'm not looking backward, so I'm not learning. But I'm still driving very quickly. So I'm taking a lot of action as an adult, but I don't want to look backwards. So I just help anybody I can. I'm learning now to help people better now because I used to help people to my demise. I will not do that anymore. I've learned, obviously, and wisened up, right? And if people talk about having or getting my help and they don't take action on it, I move on.
Right.
And if they can't help themselves. So this was the piece where I had to feel when somebody else wanted to help me, like, you know, Kurt challenging me, help yourself.
You had to receive it.
I had to receive it. I went, whoa, what do you mean help myself? Like, what does that look like? What does that mean? And so I had to go into my mind and go, okay, what does that look like? Oh my gosh, this is
vulnerable.
Exactly. But not only vulnerable, but then I had to face all the people that I've asked to help themselves, to help. So now I think you're going to learn the full circle of how to help people, but how to help yourself. And that piece of helping yourself is really one of the hardest I have ever had to deal with.
Right, because I always call it from time to time, we all catch ourselves sitting on the perch looking down.
Yes.
And then when we have the ability to help and do things for others, sometimes we have to gut check ourselves so we're not sitting on the perch.
Right.
And the hardest thing for people like, I like to say people like you and I, is you know, being able to let your guards down, to look at the mirror and go, hey, you know what, I'm one of those people that actually needs some help as well.
Oh, we all do.
And being able to not only say it, but being able to receive it and receive the critique or the honesty that comes from your vulnerability.
Absolutely.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Because we have to hear someone tell us about how we're navigating this, what we're doing, and a lot of times when you're in a traumatic space, speaking from experience, we internalize those things. You know, sometimes we can't hear it because through our dysfunctionalism and our trauma, we turn it into something negative instead of transforming it into something positive.
Absolutely.
So to me, it's navigating that and staying in that transformation space of positiveness that we have to learn to do.
Absolutely.
Because trauma teaches us to turn it into something negative. Would you agree?
It can. I think for me, I helped so many other people because, like I said, I didn't want to help myself. I didn't want to face having to deal with my own problems. It was, you know, it's far easier to deal with other people's problems than your own, right?
Right.
We all can attest to that. So it was far easier for me to help other people instead of wanting to face my stuff because, like I said, I repressed most of it.
That makes you have to be vulnerable.
And that's the other part, is the vulnerability, because prior to publicly airing on the first Conversation Shop all the trauma in my life, Sedrick, very few people knew about any of that in my life. So that's why I went into this deer in a headlight look, like, oh my gosh, I went from telling no one my entire life and holding, you know, this as a secret and holding this, deep, heavy stuff that I knew was going to come, that I never wanted to face. But then I got to the time where I said, no, I'm just going to be vulnerable. It's unlike anything Susan has shown up as, because I always thought vulnerability is weak.
Well, you were in
That's
a safe
how
space,
I thought.
But you were also in a safe space.
Correct.
You know, and when you're around similar energies and in a safe space, it's easy for people who have been in traumatic situations to then be honest about that trauma.
Absolutely.
So hold that thought. We're going to explore that a little bit on the last segment, and we're going to also go into talking about how you've used that trauma to transform you into being a successful woman.
Absolutely. Sure.
We'll be right back on the Conversation Shop. Hi, welcome back to the Conversation Shop with Sedrick Page. Again, I'm here with my very special guest, Miss Susan Tucker. Miss Tucker, we're going to dive right back into our last conversation where we were discussing trauma. So I'm just give you the floor.
Okay, so the last, we've talked about so many things, and with the lack of sleep I've had, so this will be just a stream of consciousness. But if we're talking about trauma and how trauma shows up in individuals, the wiring in their brain is a little different. So they may feel like a sense of ADD, right? Or they're highly distracted. I have a hard time boiling water and staying with it. There's a funny story behind that, but I'll tell you another time. But besides that, so highly distracted, there's going to be, you know, serious issues with unstable relationships. Because, again, with the original trauma, you're going to re-perpetuate trauma in almost every relationship that you have.
Well, talk to
sadly.
me about that. I want you to go
Sadly.
into detail about
Ooh,
how that
boy.
has manifested itself in your relationships.
Okay, so past abuse, toxicity, to now being able to learn how to trust, because there's a very different person in my life now. But have I been easy to deal with? Probably not. There have been numerous situations where I'm like, whoa, this feels like something like in my past. So then there's the trigger, and all of a sudden I'm like hyper vigilant, right? Really strong, where I think that I might be taken advantage of, or any situation. So I've had past violations really with women, who have betrayed my trust. But then I've had numerous men, again, betray my trust in business dealings, things of that nature, and there is no difference. I mean, I've had all different races, so it's not that, and it's not a gender thing. It's just, so I look at it as really a spiritual battle, good versus evil.
So but share with me
Discernment.
how you feel your trauma has manifested itself in those relationships. Was it
Okay.
the choices that you were making?
Yes, of course.
And that's how it was
Yes.
manifesting itself through
Yes.
those choices.
Yes. So
Got you.
choices, because here's what happens. As a traumatized person, you are literally a sonar or a radar. Okay, so you are out there casting off this
So like that light
traumatized.
that all these bugs fly to.
Absolutely.
Basically.
Absolutely. So then people know, and they can sense you. So when they know that you've got a really big heart, soft heart, inspiring light, whatever you want to call it, beacon of light, there are people who will glom
Try to
onto
take
you.
advantage of
Well,
it.
they'll leech on you, and they'll glom onto you. So what I was going through with business is showing people how successful you could be in real estate. Well, so I had a whole lot of talkers around me, individuals, not to mention, carrying a lot of partners, just because for me, I never held back from knowing that I was going to be successful. I think since I was a little kid, I knew I was going to be successful, but I had to get through the trauma. I had to continue to move forward in my life.
Hold that thought real quick.
Yes.
So let me ask you a question. Do you feel that, because of this, let me say this, I think because of the trauma that I've experienced in my life, it led to me being a successful person.
Yes.
You
Absolutely.
know, I hate to, I mean, maybe that's a weird thing to say,
No.
but I truly believe that
Yes.
because all the things that were a negative, I turned into
A positive.
positives
You have to.
that support me
Yes.
as a healthy,
Yes.
successful person. And again, saying healthy, quote unquote,
Yes.
because healthiness is subjective.
You're right.
So we've all,
Yeah.
but part of in my journey
Yes.
was embracing, which I never wanted to do, was embracing that I had trauma
Yep.
and I had dysfunctionalism and being able to let my guards down,
Right.
maybe through therapy, but through
Yes.
therapy, in order to heal myself. Because part of healing yourself is being able to look in the mirror
Yep.
and to be honest with yourself and being able to see honestly the reflection that comes from that.
That's right.
So for me, the minute that I did that, and quite frankly, one of my biggest traumas was when I almost died. But I say biggest trauma was because it changed me. So I left a lot of baggage
Yeah.
on that hospital bed,
Yep.
when I got up, and it changed me as a person.
Absolutely.
You know.
Absolutely. And I will have to say that every trauma that I have endured, as heavy and as tough and as, I promise you, that the level of trust and having to learn how to trust again has been a tough process. I mean, extremely tough process, because knowing that I'm the one who caused it all. Does that make sense? So, I could easily play victim and say, oh, it's their fault, or it's this person's fault, or it's this monster that I created by helping her. But at the end of the day, the one constant is me. And because it's me, I know I'm the one who has to be accountable to realize, why did you do what you did? So I had to look at it from a learning perspective, had to look at it from a trials and tribulations, and to be honest, I've been studying people, who are successful since I was 19. So I already knew that a lot of the people who have been massively successful, the multimillionaires and millionaires, I know that they have failed a lot of times. They have lost a lot of money because they have aligned with the wrong people. So absolutely, every one of those experiences, but I have to explain to you how traumatic it has been, because $1.6 million busting my butt and getting burned that much money, that's a lot of money for anybody.
That's a lot of money, yes it is.
Okay, and so for me, I had to accept the facts and the truth behind it and go, what is it about you that, and then I had to originally look back and go, could this be attached to the original traumas? Absolutely, it is.
Absolutely.
And then, of course, the market, 2008, every real estate investor got hit, so it's part of that. But it has not stopped me from moving forward and knowing that those were my lessons, or as I call them, failures, but they're really your learning lessons. So absolutely, and am I in a completely different space to have aligned with better partners? Because again, it's everything in life is about law of association. And do I choose partners where I carry them anymore? Are you kidding me? No, if you don't bring tons of value to the table, then I'm not going to partner with you. And now my partnerships look completely different than they ever did back 10, 15 years ago. Are you kidding? I mean, completely different. These are individuals, I was in real estate. Real estate is a huge passion of mine. I used to tell everybody, get into real estate, buy investment real estate, flip properties, buy it for cash flow, buy commercial properties. I will always say that till the day I die, because it is one of the fastest wealth building vehicles. But I have jumped into a different industry, and that is the world of commodities. And in that industry, I have partners that bring massive value to the table. And I'm super excited about what the future brings and what I've got in terms of creations going on. So my biggest creations on the other side of my biggest fears is right now in the process. So very fired up about that.
So let me ask you a question. If you could,
yes,
leave a message to all the ladies out there, the women, the young Asian American women, the Caucasian women, women that have been in, that are navigating trauma, that are navigating pains and different negative experiences, what message or what advice would you like to give them?
So actually, anybody, because I don't want to put a label on who's traumatized. There are so many people, and I know a lot of men who have been traumatized as well.
But this is your story, just your advice from your lens.
Absolutely. Don't put up with any amount of abuse. So a lot of toxicity in my past from relationships have been the levels of disrespect and criticism and literally emotional, mental abuse that I would take from others because I didn't feel worthy. The other thing I would like to talk to people who have been traumatized is that they can stand up for themselves. So if you are in a situation where somebody is taking advantage of you, you can say no to it. If somebody is hurting you or abusing you verbally or emotionally, you can get out of the relationship and do so quickly, because that toxicity will eat you up. And you know what? My life looks so different today because I have been able to learn from my past toxicities. And sometimes you can't help everyone. And you've got to let go and move forward with a circulation of energy with other individuals whom you can help. They can help you. And you know what? Every single person, every human being needs help in this world. So the sooner you take it, the stronger you can actually become to help more. And that's my journey right now. The humanitarian projects I've got on the table, I have those visions. I've had them for 20 years. That will not happen until I receive the help I'm supposed to get to where I'm supposed to go. So this has been the biggest push in the right direction has been you.
No,
you kicking my butt, and I love it, because you know what I do? That's what I do for others. I've coached so many individuals to face their greatness, and that's essentially what you did for me. You opened up really the door for me to face my healing so that I can be the person I'm meant to be.
Well,
I'm thankful.
I'm thankful to you as well by always pushing me forward. Just
Absolutely.
to add real quickly, what advice could you give the young ladies in the audience in regards to being aware and letting your guards down to even address some of the pains and the trauma that you have? Like, how do you, what advice would you give them to help them get to even your starting point? You know how hard it is to get to the starting point of
helping yourself.
Helping yourself first.
Yes.
Can you just talk about that just a little bit?
I can. You know, that was a really difficult space for me. I really struggled with it quite a bit because, well, how do I help myself? I've always helped others. So I really had to get real with myself and say, Susan, if you don't face this, you know, you're not going to be able to be the person that you've been, maybe even in your past, but are not going to be, I mean, and I'm not a victim. I will never be a victim.
Right.
And there's so many people out there who think that it's smart or good to share your victim stories. I don't believe that. I'm only sharing this to say that I'm overcoming it.
I understand.
I'm not there yet. However, I will not play the victim. So the sooner you can get outside of playing victim or having crabs in a bucket story. So you've heard that story? Can I share that? Okay.
Yes, go ahead.
So one crab you throw into a bucket and they'll just climb right out. You've got 3 or more crabs in a bucket and one crab attempts to get out and the other 2 yank it right back into the bucket. So that is an analogy to our families, our friends, people who may not want to see you succeed. There is a lot of horrific, toxic jealousies out there with individuals, and you know, to become successful is hard enough. I think it's hard enough to overcome trauma, right? But I'm so thankful I have so much support for that when I was ready. But it's so important that a person does not repress anymore and faces their biggest fears. So that's where I'm at right now. But you know, I really encourage people to get and seek help. I really do. Please become vulnerable. Be unlike me, because I have shut down my entire life up until a couple years ago, really, until I could learn to trust somebody. And this is how funny this is. The very first conversation Kurt and I had, I told him about it. He's like, wow, it was really, really interesting. The very first conversation, it was like me warning him, like, just so you know, I've got some serious issues I'm dealing with right now. So it's like warning him, don't get close to me. But you know what? I knew in that first conversation, he was somebody worthy that I could trust. And so he opened up that door for me to speak to somebody for the very first time where I could tell them everything. And I'm grateful for that experience because there's nobody else in my life that knows as much about me as he does. And he continues to push me forward. And I'm so thankful for, it's like, you know, so God places people into your life for a reason.
Yes, they do.
And that is to get help, but then to help, because he has, you know, huge health issues, which I'm hoping that you and I can have a conversation about health sometime. But
we'll definitely
40
have a conversation
years.
about health.
40 years of being a victim to big pharma, topical steroids. For 40 years, he was told to use topical steroids for his eczema. Eczema is not really a skin issue. It shows up that way, but it's because your gut is unhealed, right?
Right. And
So we'll talk about that another time.
We'll definitely talk about that. But I just wanted to thank you for coming on the show and being a guest.
Absolutely.
I think your story is amazing, and I think you're helping
Thank
women.
you. I hope so.
I think you're helping a lot of people out here in the audience.
I hope so.
So again, I want to thank you for being here.
Yes.
Guys, I want to
Absolutely.
thank you for joining us on the Conversation Shop, and see you next time.